The sun hadn't yet burned off the mountain mist when I turned off the logging road and rumbled down the gravel drive toward my cabin. A familiar stillness hung in the pines, the kind of silence you only get 10 miles past the last cell tower. I parked beside the woodshed, killed the engine, and stepped out into the crisp air. My boots hit the earth like they belonged there. Because they did. This cabin wasn't a weekend escape. It was my home, my inheritance. My grandfather built the first version by hand in 1952, and I'd rebuilt it log by log 3 years ago, keeping the bones and honoring the blood that shaped this valley. I hadn't been back in 2 weeks. Work had kept me in the city, but nothing ever changed up. Here, at least, that's what I thought. A flash of movement near the trailhead caught my eye. A figure, stiff posture, pastel blouse, clipboard in hand, was picking her way through the underbrush, like she expected it to part for her. "Excuse me?" she called, waving a manicured hand. "Sir?" I didn't recognize her, but I already knew what she was. She stopped 10 feet from my truck, nose wrinkling at the scent of pine sap and damp soil. "Are you the property owner here?" "I am," I said, brushing sawdust from my flannel. "Can I help you?" She held up her clipboard like it was a court summons. "Karen Witherspoon. I'm the chairwoman of the Hillside Preserve Homeowners Association." I just looked at her. "This isn't Hillside Preserve. We're adjacent," she said sharply. "This structure is clearly visible from our Northern Loop Trail. It violates visual uniformity standards and may interfere with our designated scenic viewpoints." I stared at her. Visual uniformity, she didn't blink. Per the Hillside Covenant Article 4, any visible structures that detract from the natural skyline are subject to removal. I've filed a report. You'll receive a formal notice by mail. A laugh nearly escaped, but I caught it. "Ma'am, this cabin is on private land. It's been here longer than your subdivision." She sniffed, undeterred. "That may be, but the HOA maintains the right to report and escalate any disruptions to the aesthetic continuity of the area. We take these matters seriously." "Aesthetic continuity," I repeated slowly. "You understand this is wilderness, not a golf course." "Don't be flippant." Her eyes narrowed. "We've invested millions in our community. We will not tolerate structures that damage property values or scenic harmony." I walked over to her, calm but deliberate. "You're trespassing. This is a public trail," she snapped. "Not past that marker." I pointed to the rusted sign, nailed into an old pine. "That's the boundary line. Everything beyond it, including this cabin, is part of the Wilder Valley Trust. My family's land. You're a mile outside Hillside jurisdiction." She blinked, then recovered fast. "Even so, the view of your shed is visible from HOA land. That makes it our concern. It's not a shed." I stepped up onto the cabin's porch. "It's a home, and it's staying." Karen scribbled furiously on her clipboard, lips pressed tight. "Expect a formal cease and desist. You'll need to submit for design review and removal within 30 days. We've dealt with boundary issues before." "No," I said flatly. "You haven't." She hesitated, finally noticing the subtle way the trees leaned into the valley, how the terrain dipped into private forest land. Her gaze traveled down toward the lowlands, where scattered cabins nestled among thousands of untouched acres. "This entire valley," I said, "is owned by the Wilder family, and I'm the last Wilder left." For the first time, she looked uncertain, but only for a second. "Then I suggest you cooperate," she said, turning back to the trail, "or this will become very expensive for you." She vanished into the woods like a pink-clad phantom, clipboard clutched like a sword. I stood there, heart calm, but blood heating. She didn't know yet, didn't know that every pine cone she stepped over was mine, didn't know the HOA's main access road sat on leased land, my land. Didn't know who she was picking a fight with, but she would, very soon. The letter arrived 4 days later, certified, stamped, and reeking of arrogance. I sat on the cabin porch with my coffee as I slit the envelope open. The header bore the Hillside Preserve HOA seal in pretentious gold foil. Beneath it, a bolded demand, cease and desist. Unauthorized structure, affecting scenic view compliance. I read it twice, chuckling at the legal jargon. According to Karen's complaint, my illegally constructed visual obstruction violated Section 7B of their Extended Visual Ordinance and must be deconstructed or relocated out of line of sight from community trails within 30 days. They even had the audacity to include an aerial photo, grainy and taken at a slant, that showed my cabin, barely visible, through a sliver of pine trees. They didn't see a home. They saw a blemish. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a view. This was about control. Karen and her ilk didn't care about rules. They cared about dominance. She wanted the wilderness manicured and obedient, like her HOA fiefdom, and she couldn't tolerate the idea of someone who didn't bow to it. That afternoon, I drove into town, population 312, where everyone still knew everyone. I stopped by the county clerk's office. "Mornin', Wade," said Margaret, sliding her glasses up her nose. "What brings you in?" "Need a copy of the land use charter," I said. "And any filings from Hillside Preserve." She squinted. "You got a problem with them folks already?" "Looks like they've got a problem with me," she laughed. "I heard they filed for extended jurisdiction last year. Wanted to push their influence out to the valley rim. County told them to shove it. Mind printing me that denial?" I asked. She slid a fresh sheet across the counter. "You gonna fight 'em?" "Not yet," I said, folding the paper. "But I'm not moving either." The next day, I returned to the cabin to find 2 strangers in fluorescent vests pacing near my property line with a drone hovering overhead. I approached calmly. "You boys lost." One of them lowered his clipboard. "We're with Summit Surveying, contracted by the Hillside HOA, just performing a visibility assessment." "On private land?" I asked. "This area's under visual review. Per article, I'll save you the legal tap dance." I pointed at the rusted boundary marker. "Everything from that sign inward is mine. That drone's recording without consent. You're trespassing. You've got 60 seconds to pack it up." The younger one shifted nervously. "We were told this land was under review, not by anyone with authority." They didn't argue further. The drone buzzed down. They packed their gear and left without a word. But the message was clear. Karen wasn't backing off. Later that week, a second letter came, this one nastier. It accused me of obstructing community harmony, warned of legal escalation, and included a threat to fine me $1,000 per day if the cabin remained non-compliant. I stared at the paper, letting the absurdity settle. She really believed she could push me out, but what Karen didn't know, what she hadn't even thought to ask, was how deeply rooted I was here. I didn't just own my cabin. I owned everything. The trails. I granted public easements to the county decades ago. The scenic overlook Karen bragged about in her HOA newsletter. Built on land leased from me. Their gated front entrance. Constructed on a parcel still registered to the Wilder Trust under a 99-year lease agreement. They thought they were the masters of the mountains. They were tenants on my land, so I stopped waiting. I pulled out the original Wilder Trust ledger, yellowed and brittle, passed down from my grandfather. I scanned every lease agreement, every easement, every clause. Then I made a few calls. First to a local lawyer with a mean streak and a love for boundary disputes. Then to a drone operator of my own. Let's see how the HOA liked it when the spotlight swung the other way. A week after Karen's last letter, I drove down to the Hillside Preserve gates with a packet in hand. The security guard barely looked up until he saw my face. "I'm here to see your HOA board," I said. Do you have an appointment? They'll want to see this." I handed him the envelope. Inside, scanned deeds, lease contracts, surveyor maps, and a certified notice of land use revocation. The guard blinked, then picked up the phone. Karen had fired the first shot. Now it was my turn. Karen didn't come out to greet me. She sent the board. They gathered in the HOA's Welcome Lodge, a gaudy faux log building with stone veneer and artificial fireplace, designed to feel rustic without ever touching dirt. I counted 6 people at the conference table, 3 in pastel golf shirts, 2 in business casual, and 1 man in a sports coat trying too hard to look important. Karen sat at the head, clipboard in hand, posture tight, smile tighter. "Mr. Wilder," she said, voice coated in thin politeness. "This is a private meeting of the Hillside Preserve Executive Committee. You'll need to state your purpose quickly." I set the leather folder on the table. "I'm here to clarify a few things." I figured it's best to do it in person. The man in the blazer leaned forward. "If this is about the notice sent to your residence, the issue has been escalated. We've begun preparing litigation." I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and that's why you're about to reconsider. Inside were signed deeds, dating back to 1971, tax records proving ownership of over 4,000 acres, a map of the valley marked with every lease, easement, and conditional use permit, all tied to the Wilder Trust. I let them absorb the weight of it. "Your main road cuts through parcel 113, I said calmly. "That's mine. So is your scenic overlook, your West Loop Trail, your community picnic glen, and about 70% of the terrain your HOA claims to maintain." Karen shifted, but didn't speak. Her fingers tightened around the pen. "I've been generous," I continued. "My grandfather signed agreements with the county to allow shared access for hiking and community use. In return, we got small stipends and respect. But lately, that respect's been lacking." The man in the blazer looked through the documents, his face paling by the page. "These leases are still active. Most expire in the next 5 years. Some can be revoked sooner, especially the ones with behavioral clauses." I paused. Clause 3. Misuse of shared land to target or harass the title holder results in immediate termination. Karen opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You filed complaints, sent surveyors onto my land without consent, issued threats. That qualifies as harassment." The room went still. The only sound was the low hum of the fake fireplace. "Let me be clear," I said, voice calm but unwavering. "You don't own the view, you rent it, and you just made your landlord angry." Blazer cleared his throat. "Surely there's a way to resolve this amicably." "There is," I said, sliding forward 2 documents. First, a formal withdrawal of all complaints against my cabin. Second, a written apology, acknowledging the boundaries and my family's ownership of Wilder Valley. You sign that, we reset the clock. "And if we don't?" Karen asked, her tone brittle. I leaned back. "Then the overlook gets fenced. Trail access gets revoked. The picnic area becomes a private hunting zone. And your HOA's pretty little nature reserve becomes a closed wilderness again." Blazer turned to her. "Karen, if he owns the land, we don't have legal ground. We'll be sued into the Stone Age." Karen's face had gone blotchy. Rage and disbelief fought for dominance. You can't bully us into submission. I'm not bullying you, I said quietly. You picked this fight. I'm just reminding you who holds the deed. She stood, trembling. This is an outrage. This cabin is an eyesore. This cabin, I interrupted, is older than your HOA, older than your community, and older than your entitlement. There was a long silence. Then, Blazer reached for a pen. Give us 24 hours. We'll review the documents with counsel. I nodded. You have 24. After that, gates close. I left the lodge as a cold wind, picked up through the pines. Clouds rolled down the mountainside like smoke, coiling low around the cabins of Hillside Preserve. Back at my truck, I paused to look out over the valley, my valley. Let them stare at my cabin. Let them hate it. It wasn't built for them. It was built to last. And it would outlast every inch of painted wood and power-tripping paper pushers they'd stacked against the forest. But I knew Karen wasn't done. Not yet. She was the kind who never backed down unless she was shoved. And if she didn't take the hint soon, I already had a plan. Karen did not apologize. Not in writing, not in person, and not through the lawyers I expected her to hide behind. Instead, 2 days later, she doubled down. A new letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from a private law firm in the city. It accused me of emotional damage caused by visual blight, claimed my cabin, diminished community property values, and threatened a civil suit seeking damages in excess of $250,000. She wasn't retreating. She was trying to bankrupt me. What she didn't realize, still, was that I wasn't some hermit clinging to a plot of dirt. I was Wilder Valley. My grandfather's foresight ensured every legal stone had been turned, every boundary carved in ink and iron. So I made the final call. 2 weeks later, before the first summer holiday weekend, I activated the plan I'd only hinted at. Step 1. I terminated 5 easements, legally and cleanly. A simple filing with the county clerk's office. Backed by the violation of behavioral clauses Karen's antics had triggered. Overnight, the West Loop Trail, Picnic Glen, and the entire scenic overlook were closed off with posted signs. Private property, no trespassing. Step 2. I erected barriers, subtle, not aggressive. Natural fencing made from stacked timber and boulders. The kind that looked organic, but made clear the point. At the overlook, a weatherproof plaque was mounted on a cedar post. This land belongs to the Wilder Trust, protected and preserved by family hands for over 80 years. Access is a privilege, not a right. That privilege has been revoked. Step 3. I issued a cease and desist to the HOA itself, the community's main road. Yes, the one they paved and named Hillside Parkway, cut directly through one of my parcels. I granted them 90 days to negotiate a new access lease. The message was clear. Get your house in order or lose your way in. By the end of the week, the fallout was deafening. I heard from angry residents first. Some tried calling me, numbers I didn't recognize, flashing on my cabin landline. Others emailed, some begging, some fuming. They wanted to know why their morning hikes were blocked, why the picnic areas were chained, why their sunset view had vanished behind no access signs. They had no idea their HOA had been picking a fight it couldn't win. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. A neighbor 2 lots over, a kind woman named Ruth, who walked the trails every morning and always waved to me, sent me a recording. Karen tried to spin the narrative, claimed I was being petty, called me vindictive. But the documents I had circulated among board members told a different story, one of property law. documented harassment, and a battle Karen had started, long before she understood who she was dealing with. By the meeting's end, Blazer, whose name turned out to be Greg Mitchell, stood up and read aloud a motion, effective immediately. The Hillside Preserve HOA hereby revokes its complaint against Mr. Wilder, apologizes for the overreach, and formally requests negotiation for renewed land use access. The motion passed 5-1. Karen voted no, but she was outnumbered, and by the next week, out of office. She resigned quietly, citing community stress and a need to refocus her energies. No public apology, no direct word to me, just vanished from the HOA roster, like a typo finally deleted. I reinstated 2 of the 5 easements, just enough to let the residents access their trails again. Not for the HOA, for the people like Ruth. People who respected the land. I never opened the trails by the overlook again. That one stayed closed. A message, not just to Karen, but to anyone else who might try to treat the wild like a trimmed lawn. Sometimes the mountain needs to remind folks who really owns the horizon, and me, I kept to my cabin, chopping wood, watching sunsets, letting the wind speak louder than HOA mandates ever could. They can report me, fine me, threaten lawsuits, all they like. I'll still be here. Because when the power trips fade and the paperwork burns away, there's only one thing left: deed and dirt, and I own both.